Hi everyone and welcome back. In our previous video, we successfully added an inventory data to NetBox. In today's video, our focus is going to shift to demonstrate how we can interact with data from NetBox using Python throughout the NetBox API. So before we dive into coding, let's first look at the NetBox API documentation, shall we? So what I'll do, I will open up a web browser, and again, I will say NetBox documentation. I'll click on the first link. What we're after is the docs.netbox.dev. So I'm going to click on that one. And what I'll do, I will go to integrations option. And then I'll click on the REST API. We can see all the HTTP verbs that we can use in order to get or create or modify or even delete data. If I scroll down a little bit, you will be able to see an example of how you could use REST API and the JSON format response. But what we'll do, I will scroll down into the interactive documentation section, and you will find that you can access the comprehensive all REST API endpoints. And what I'll do, I will show you how you can access this. So what I will do, I will copy the this URL, and I will open up a new web browser, and then I will put the HTTPS. And then I'll put the IP address of the NetBox, and then I'll paste the Swagger URL, and I'll hit enter. Here you will see all endpoints related to NetBox, and you can see how they are structured. So what I will do, I will collapse the circuit object. And if I look at the DCIM object as an example, and let's say that I maybe want to get all the devices I have, I would need to use this endpoint, for instance. So if you scroll all the way to API/DCIM/devices and expand on that, you will see all the parameters on the left-hand side that will be displayed when you use this get endpoint. And what you see here is the name of the variable, but also the data type. It will show you if it is an integer or a string, for example. And if you scroll down all the way to the response section, you will see that the status code you should expect when the API has been invoked successfully, 200. And the response data from the request you raised, you can find it on the right-hand side here. If you want to create a device, you would need to use the post request with a particular schema that is defined here. And if you click on the API DCIM devices, but for the post REST post object, and click on it, you will be able to see the request body, as you can see on the screen. But if you would like to know what are the variables that are mandatory, so if you click on the schema, here it will reveal all the variables that are mandatory. Any variable that has the asterisk in front of it is mandatory. And if you click on the chevron, you will see the data type that is expected from the payload data when you invoke the post API. So you've got the device type, that's an integer. You've got the role, that's also an integer. And the same applies with the site. Now, if you scroll down, you can see the responses with a different code status. So the code status this time is 201. If you get that 201 status, that means your API has been invoked successfully and the data has been posted accordingly. So with that being said, you can follow the same principle for the put or patch or the delete requests. Okay, folks, enough of that. Let's dive into coding and try to interact with the data from NetBox. Okay, folks, what I have done so far is I have opened up a PyCharm application, which is my IDE that I'm going to use from now on. And I've created a new project, and inside that project, I've created a file, a Python file called NetBox_API. And what I want to show you guys, there are three different ways that I'm aware of that allows you to interact with NetBox using Python. I'm going to demonstrate each of these ways. And then I will walk you through the pros and cons for each of these methods. And obviously you can choose and pick what suits you best. So the first way is what I'm going to do. I'm going to import requests. And then also I'm going to import print from rich. And then what I'll do, I will create a variable, and that variable, I'm going to call it headers. And this variable is a dictionary which has key and a value. And the key is going to be authorization. And the value is going to be token. And then I would need to copy the token that I've generated from NetBox into here. Oops. So for those that would like to know how to generate a token from NetBox, what you would need to do is you would need to go back to your NetBox, and then under the user profile, you click on that combo box, and you can see there's an option here called API tokens. If you click on it, there you'll be able to manage all the tokens that you have. You'll be able to create new ones. You'll be able to edit existing ones, so on and so forth. So if you click on the Add a Token button, here you'll be able to see the key. This is the token that we need to copy, and then you can edit the details associated with that token. As you can see, it's quite self-explanatory. So I will leave that for you guys, and I don't need to create one because I already created one. So I'm going to cancel that. So I'm going to open up the web browser that is associated with the API comprehensive documentation from NetBox. And if you search for devices, and you will be able to see the endpoint that we're after. I want to display all the devices that I have configured in NetBox. So what I want to do, I want to copy this endpoint. And what I'll do, I will say DCIM/devices. And what I want to do next is I'm going to set the headers variable I've created, and I'm going to specify the verify option be false. Next, what I want to do next, I want to actually print the status of the REST API request that I'm raising. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say r_print. I'm going to put the response, and then I will execute the script. And what you see here, guys, is the response status. It says 200, which exactly matches what we see from the API documentation. So if I scroll all the way down, you can see that under the responses section, you can see that the code is set to 200, which is what we expect. And this is the schema or the example value that we should be expecting from the response. So what I'll do, I'm going to try to get the data based on JSON format. So I'm going to say response.json, and then I'm going to execute the script again. And if I expand that window and scroll all the way up, you can see that currently we have one single router or one single device that's been configured. And the results variable, you can see that we have as a list of dictionaries, and inside that list we have the first dictionary that we can see here. Starts with the ID, which is a NetBox unique ID for that particular object, and it tells you the URL, and it tells you all the other variables that is associated with that object. The name, for instance, the device type, the role, and so on and so forth. So what I want to show you next is what happens if we have a table or an endpoint that is associated with a particular table that has more than 1,000 records. I don't think, or I don't believe that this way of fetching data is 100% satisfying. So what I want to show you is if I go back to my NetBox and then go all the way to customization, and in here there is a field or a table called tags. And what I have done is I have created 1,100 different tags in this table. So I would like to retrieve all this data from invoking a single API. So if I go back to the Swagger and search for tag, okay, so in order for me to get all the tags, I would need to use this endpoint, which is API/extras/tags. I just want to demonstrate something for you guys, so bear with me 1 second. So I am going to say extras/tags. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to print the status of the response. And also what I'm going to do, I'm going to also print how many records do we have. I'm going to say print and then response.json. And then what I'm interested in is a particular header or a particular key called count. And then line number 11, what I want to show you is the actual result. So I'm going to say print response.json. And in here, I'm going to print the results. And I will just comment this line. If I hit enter, right, what we see here, guys, is you see that the API response came back with 200, which is good. And here we see that the number of records found is 1,100. Now, if we were to examine this data that we've received, I understand that it's quite a lot to see here, but I can assure you that this does not show you all the records from a single API call. So if I were to say, for instance, for each line in response.json, and I put the result in a square bracket, and then what I want to do, I want to print the name of each tag. And then also, I am going to count how many records we have managed to find within the HTTP response. So I'm going to say I plus equal 1. And here I'm going to print I. There I'm going to uncomment this, or sorry, comment this line. And then I'm going to execute the script again. Right, so as you can see here, guys, you can see that we have managed to retrieve only 50 from 1,000 records. So this method is not going to work well if you've got big data or if you've got more than 50 records in a given object. This method is not going to show you all the data from the table. And this is why I'm going to show you the next or the second method of interacting with NetBox data. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete all of that. And what I'll do is I am going to create a new class. So I'm going to create a package, Python package, and I'm going to call it classes. And also I'm going to create a new Python package, and I'm going to call it global underscore functions. So inside that class, I am going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it NetBox underscore API. And in here, what I'm going to say from requests import session, and also we want to import SSL. And finally, I want to import URL 3. SSL. I'm going to also say SSL dot underscore create default yes context equal SSL underscore dot underscore create default, not create unverified underscore context, and URL lib3 dot disable warning, and inside I'm going to say URL lib3 dot exceptions insecure request warning. I'm also going to say URL lib3 dot disable warning. This is just, guys, to prevent seeing any of these messages, as you can see on the screen here. So if you want to have a clean output, I would recommend you to use these steps. So I'm going to create a class, and I'm going to call it NetBox API. So I'm going to say class API. In here, I'm going to create the init function. And in here, I'm going to define some variables. And these variables are very important for what we are going to do in the future. So the first variable, what I'm going to do, I'm going to declare the base URL. API there. And also I'm going to define the NetBox token. I'm also going to declare the headers. So I'm going to bore you. And then what I'm going to do next, I'm going to create a new session here, and a few other variables that I will need. Right, as you can see here, guys, so I'm constructing the init function so that when I initiate the class object, all of these variables will be triggered and will be assigned accordingly. So what I want to do next is I want to set up the endpoints for, in order for me to retrieve the data that I'm after. So for instance, I'm going to create a endpoint with the tags. I'm also going to create another endpoint for the devices. You can create as many as you want, and so on and so forth. So I will leave that to you. And next, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a function, and that function, I am going to call it underscore API or object full. And inside that, inside, I'm going to say count underscore limit count off. And URL extension. And inside the function, I'm going to say requests equal self session get. And inside, I'm going to specify the attributes that I'm after. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the data from the request in a JSON format. And I'm going to return the data. So what else I'm going to do, I'm going to also create another function, and I'm going to call that function counts underscore for underscore API underscore. And inside there, I'm going to say API attributes. And in here, I'm going to say requests equal self session get its URL plus the API object. I'm going to say verify equal false. And then after that, what I want to do, I want to get the data from the request in a JSON format. And what I'll do, I will return the count of that data. So it looks like we have an error here. Yes. Okay, so I need a couple of spaces there. Brilliant. Okay, so now we've constructed the class. What I want to do next is to create a global functions, a new Python script. So I'm going to right click on the folder and I'm going to create a new Python file, and I'm going to call it global function. So I'm going to call it global underscore functions. And in here, I am going to create a global dictionary. I'm going to call it g underscore dic underscore devices underscore netbox underscore big data. And I'm going to assign it to a dictionary. And I'm going to do the same with the integer. G underscore end underscore devices page equal 0. And I'm going to create a couple of functions in there, guys. So the first function, I'm going to call it fun all data from NetBox. And in here, I'm going to say count underscore limit and count underscore off set. And then also NetBox API underscore object. And finally, we want the endpoint. And in here, we are going to say global. Global. We're going to call these two variables. And then we're going to say data underscore from NetBox equal NetBox dot API. API object. Cool. Let's make sure that I'm calling the right one. Go back. And inside, I'm going to say count limit, count offset, and then the endpoint. And what I'll do next is I'm going to go through each of the data that I've received from that API request that I've raised. So I'm going to say for each element in data from NetBox, and I'm going to call the results key, and I'm going to say p underscore end underscore page equal 1, adding 1 for each iteration. And what I'm going to do next, I'm going to get the dictionary, and I'm going to assign the key using the element integer variable. And I'm going to assign it to a new or empty dictionary. So what I'll do next, I'm going to say for each key and each value, each element, items, I'm going to say if ID is inside, I'm going to bypass that, but we can just leave it as is. And what we'll do, we will say something like, I want that dictionary to create a new key. And that key is going to be dynamic, and I'm going to assign it to the value. And what I'll do after I've finished or complete the loop, I'll return the dictionary. So this is the first function that we would need to create. The second function that I also want to create is to do with going through big tables, and this is very important, very essential to what I'm trying to show you here, guys. So if I say diff sort out tables, and inside I'm going to say API string function call and NetBox for API underscore object. And here I'm also going to call these two variables. And what I'll do, I will assign them to the default value. So I'm going to say that this integer starts from 0, and that dictionary starts empty, pretty much. And then what I'll do next, I'm going to say netbox underscore API, netbox underscore API underscore object dot count equal netbox underscore API underscore object dot get count. So we want the second method. Counts for API limit, and then we would need to pass the endpoint. API string. And what I'll do, I'll create a variable, local variable called j, and I'm going to assign it to 0. And in here, I'll say if netbox underscore API underscore object dot count is bigger than 1000, then what I want you to do, I want to start at 1, and the end is going to be, I'm going to create a variable called end. I'm going to say this is the end. So it starts from 1 and it ends at whatever the count of the table is. I'm also going to say offset underscore limit equals 0. And I'm going to say for I in range, I'm going to say the start and the end. And I'm going to say j plus equal 1. Duration is going to add 1. I'm going to say if I percentage 1000 equal 0, then I want you to call a function in find here. I'm going to pass the attributes of 1000, and then I'm going to say the offset limit, and I'm going to send the object NetBox underscore API underscore object, and finally I'm going to set the API string. And then what I'll do, I'm going to set the offset limit to 1000. And here I'm going to say if j is not equal 0, then I'm going to say num string equal j, offset limit for pre equal num string and I'm going to say num underscore int equal int and then followed by offset limit equal j minus this variable, and then I'm going to call the function. And inside, I'm going to say 1000 set limit NetBox API object, and finally the API string. Finally, if none of these is true, I'm going to say else I want you to call function call. I'm going to set that to 1000, this to 0, and then offset, no, that would be the NetBox underscore API object. And then finally would be the API string. And then what I want to do is return the dictionary, which is this guy. So if I go back to the original script that I've created, what I want to do, I am going to say from classes NetBox underscore API, I want you to import NetBox API. And also I'm going to import global functions. Import global functions. Global functions as g underscore functions. Right, what I need to do next is to create the NetBox API object. So I'm going to say NetBox underscore API underscore object equal NetBox API. And here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to count the device first, or I'm going to count whatever object I'm trying to get. I'm going to say count key function dot sort out big tables, and inside I'm going to say NetBox underscore API underscore object or obj dot tags and g function or g underscore function get all data from NetBox. And I'm going to say NetBox API underscore object. So let's just run this and see if this is going to work with no hiccups so far. So I'm going to execute that, and we do have an error. And the error, it looks like the token is not correct. So bear with me 1 second. All right, guys, I can see there's a typo here. So the actual variable is called int. It should be actually nd, so that would match. So I'm going to go back to my NetBox script, and I'm going to call that again. And we can see that we've received some data, which is quite big. But bear with me 1 second. Yeah, it doesn't actually tell you the number of data that has been retrieved. So what I want to show you is how much data can we actually get from using this method. So what I'll do, I will create a local variable I integer, and I'm going to assign it to 0. I'm going to say for each value and each key, each value in count.items. And here I'm going to say I plus equal 1. And I'm going to print the name of each key. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to print the number of iteration. And I'm going to put the I variable. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to execute this. And if we look at the data or the output, you can see that the number of iteration is 1,100. That exactly matches what we have in NetBox. And if I scroll all the way up, you can see that this is pretty much all the names, all the tags names that have been configured on NetBox. So this is the second method. I understand that it can be a little bit overwhelming, but I'm going to jump into the third method. And the third method, it's much more easier. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to delete all of that, comment all of that. I'm going to say import by NetBox. And in here, I'm going to say NetBox equal by NetBox dot API. And inside the parentheses, I'm going to say HTTPS. And I'm going to put the IP address. And I'm going to specify the token. And I'm going to say NetBox to disable the verification or to make it false. So I'm going to say NetBox HTTP underscore session dot verify equal false. And here I'm going to say, let's get all tags equal NetBox dot extras dot tags all. And I am going to print 0 multiplied by 100. No, let's 50. And then I'm going to specify a local variable with an integer of 0, say for each tag in tags. I'm going to say I plus equal 1. And I'm going to use the rprint. I'm going to say each tag. And then here, I'm going to say print I, and I've completed with the loop. And I'm going to copy this statement. So let's go ahead and execute this job, guys, and let's see what's going to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and execute it. So you can see that the number of iteration has been declared as 1,100, which is exactly what we after. It did take much longer, or slightly longer than the second method, but we've managed to obtain all the data from the tags table, as you can see on the screen. So we've reached the end of the video. If you found this video helpful, please kindly don't forget to like and subscribe for more tech tutorial. If you have any questions or run into issues regarding the code, if you've got any challenges regarding any aspect of what I have demonstrated today, please feel free to ask in the comment below, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks for watching, guys, and peace.